moving plants. And again, leaves need what? Leaves need CO2, right, to do photosynthesis, right? And plants don't have a respiratory system or a circulatory system, right? So how does CO2 move in plants? It moves via diffusion. And diffusion is controlled by what? Concentration gradients. Concentration gradients. Okay? And CO2 moves into a leaf through what? Wait, how does it move in? So it moves in via the stomata, right? So when the stomata are open, what can enter? CO2 can diffuse in. What diffuses out? Water diffuses out. What is more important to a plant? Getting CO2 or preserving water? Water, right? So this is more important to a plant.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
what does it say next to the
Concentration gradients. I just wrote this twice. Yeah, concentration gradients. Yeah. Okay. So, with that said, let's draw a picture of a leaf. Okay, so try to fit two pieces all at once. And on the right side, there's a box that says from bottom to top. So we're going to track the movement of carbon from the bottom to the top. Okay. So, what do you have on the top side of a leaf? You have a cuticle on the top. Do you have a cuticle on the bottom? Yes, right. You also have a cuticle on the bottom. Where in this plant do you want to place your stomata? Okay, so you want to place the stomata on the bottom. Why? Because the top side of the leaf is exposed to sunlight, right? So you have greater rates of evaporation. But you still need stomata, right? If you don't have stomata, CO2 can't enter and you can't do the Calvin cycle. So you still need stomata, but most of the stomata are on the bottom to minimize water loss, right? And again, that's the most important thing for a plant, to preserve the amount of water. Okay? So CO2 will diffuse into a leaf via the stomata, right? Okay? And this region, this bottom region, is made up of lots of cells, and this bottom region is known as what? The spongy membrane. Okay, and before we continue, let's mention something about CO2. CO2 diffuses 10,000 times slower in water versus air, right? It diffuses way slower in water. What are cells made up of? Water. So does CO2 want to come in contact with the cell? No, you want to avoid all of the cells, right? So with that said, as CO2 moves in, so this is CO2, it's going to move in through stomata. Does it want to do this? No, right? It doesn't want to go through a cell, so it's going to move through an airspace, right? So CO2 diffuses into a leaf via the stomata and moves via the air spaces between cells of the spongy mesophyll, right? It wants to avoid the cells. Okay. Eventually, it wants to reach cells known as palisade cells. Okay. Where do you want to put your palisade cells? Palisade cells are the cells that contain your chloroplasts, right? So chloroplasts are where your light independent and your light dependent reactions occur. Do you want them close to the top or to the bottom? The top to maximize exposure to sunlight, right? So your palisade cells are going to be on the top. Right? To maximize exposure to light, because that's where most of photosynthesis occurs. Okay? And if I blow a palisade cell up, it looks kind of like this. And I just told you that within the palisade cells, you have what organelle? You have chloroplasts, right? Chloroplasts are found in palisade cells, right? And again, you want to be close to light. That's one thing. So that's why the palisade cells are on the top. Where in the palisade cell do you want to put the chloroplast? In the middle or on the edges? On the edges. So the chloroplasts are on the edges of the palisade cells. Right? And one more thing about the palisade cells, why are they rectangular shaped? It maximizes the rectangular shape maximizes light absorption. Right? The rectangular shape maximizes light absorption, and you want to put the chloroplast on the edge of the palisade cell. Why? Why don't you want to put the chloroplast in the middle of the palisade cell? Because what do you want? What needs to go in the chloroplast? CO2, right? That's the whole point, right? CO2 needs to diffuse into the stroma of the chloroplast for you to have the Calvin cycle. What did I tell you earlier? CO2 diffuses way slower in water, right? So the palisade cell is a cell, so it contains water. So you want to minimize the exposure of CO2 to water. So you want to put the chloroplast as close to the edge as possible so the CO2 can diffuse in to the chloroplast, right? Okay. And then you can do the Calvin cycle and produce glucose, right? Awesome. Any questions about this process? All right, so with these, make sure you understand why things are located where, and also the direct effect, right? He could ask you, why are the stomata on the bottom? He could tell you, palisade cells are rectangular, right? That's correct, but it doesn't answer the question, right? So make sure you read the question too. Any questions about this? There may be a few, but the majority of them will be in the palatate cells. If there are, there would be a few, but just know they're in the palatate cells. Any questions? Okay, so let's continue on to the next part, which is the box that says desert plants. Okay, so what can you tell me about a desert? Desert is really dry, right? So you don't have a lot of water, right? Not much water. So why is that a problem? Plants care more about water than CO2, right? So if you don't have enough water, they're going to want to close the stomata. If you close your stomata all the time, you're not going to have photosynthesis, you're not going to produce glucose, and you're going to die, right? So this isn't going to work, right? C3 photosynthesis doesn't work in the desert, right? So you need a new mechanism, and this mechanism is CAM photosynthesis, okay? So what happens in CAM photosynthesis? Desert plants open their stomata at night. Right, so when you open your stomata at night, what goes in? CO2 diffuses in. Do you still have water loss? A little bit, right? But the rate of water loss is much less. Okay. And then in the day, during the day, the stomata are closed, but that's when photosynthesis occurs. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So it sounds great, right? But what's a potential problem? Okay, so CO2 relies on diffusion, right? Which means you need a concentration gradient. Right? Which means you need, CO2 will only flow into the leaf if you have high concentrations outside and low concentrations inside, right? Okay, so during the day, a regular C3 plant can take in CO2, right? Does that CO2 just sit there? No, it's used up by the Calvin cycle, right? So CO2 levels are kept low, right? So that allows you to continue to diffuse CO2 into your cell because you have low levels inside because you're using it up. At night, you're not doing the Calvin cycle, right? So what happens? CO2 will flow in, right? So you need high CO2 to low CO2. And as more CO2 flows in, eventually this will reach high levels. And once you have high and high, will CO2 flow in? No. So then CO2 stops flowing in. Okay? So if that happened, this CAM plant would probably die really soon, right? It wouldn't be able to store enough CO2. What's a solution to this? A solution is, here's the solution. So, at night, CO2, here's the air, here's the leaf, CO2 flows in, right? And eventually, the concentration of CO2 in the leaf will rise, right? And again, you want to keep CO2 in the leaf low so you maintain that concentration gradient. How can you remove CO2 at night? How do you remove CO2 at night? Yes, you're going to convert this to malate, right? Or malic acid. Right, so this removes CO2 and keeps CO2 levels in the leaf low. Right, so this allows for the concentration gradient to continue, right? Right, you want to maintain the concentration gradient. Does that make sense? Okay, so does this go on forever? No. What's the problem? What's another limitation? Where is the malate acid stored? In a vacuole. So malate is stored in a vacuole. So a limitation is the size of the vacuole. Right? Once the vacuole is full of malate, you can no longer convert CO2 to malate, and CO2 no longer comes in, right? So comparing C3 photosynthesis with CAM photosynthesis, which one has more carbon dioxide? C3, right? Because CAM photosynthesis is limited by the size of the vacuole, right? This doesn't solve the entire problem, right? Okay, but it's enough so where you have enough CO2 so you can still do photosynthesis during the day. Okay, any questions? Okay, so that's CAM photosynthesis. And the very last space on your packet, yes. It would differ between. Okay, so this last space right here should say C3 photosynthesis. Right? C3 photosynthesis, and what can you tell me about C3 photosynthesis? It's what all the other plants besides CAM plants do, right? So unless it's a desert plant, you know it does C3 photosynthesis, right? So what's the difference? When do they open their stomata? During the day, right? So they open stomata during the day, right? So of course they do, yeah, so they have CO2 diffuses and during the day. Do they close their stomata? At night, right? So then they close their stomata at night. Okay. So again, they can store more CO2 because the stomata are open during the day when they do the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle uses that CO2 so you can maintain that concentration gradient, right? Okay. So that's C3 photosynthesis. And before we move on to respiration, I want you to flip back to the very first page and let's talk about the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle. Actually, let's keep it on.
Just put it in the order. That's all I'm Whenever we get to that, please be sure you get close up. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, before you continue, I'm going to make two really quick announcements. Commercial break. So, if y'all are pre-med, how many of y'all are pre-med? So obviously you'll want to go into medical school, right? So in addition to your grades, you need to make sure you're volunteering at the clinic, right? Doing stuff outside of class, right? So after exam 2, Tuesday night, the Bernard Harris Pre-Medical Society is holding their second meeting at 8 p.m. in the English and Philosophy building, room 1. So right after exam 2, you can head over to the English and Philosophy building, and they're going to have food there, so if you're hungry, you can eat food. And Texas Tech Medical School will be coming over to talk about how to get into medical school, in addition to other stuff. So check it out, and also, another thing is, I don't know if you've heard about Raiderthon, but Raiderthon is a huge event that's going to be held April the 6th, and all the proceeds from Raiderthon goes to a charity called Children's Miracle Network. And Children's Miracle Network is a local charity that benefits UMC. So if you've ever gone to UMC, they're building a new neonatal intensive care unit, and the money from Raiderthon is actually going towards helping those babies, right? And I personally really connect to the event because I was born prematurely, not like by like a lot, but like just a little bit. So like, I mean, it's things like this that really impact people's lives, right? I'm okay right now, I'm fine. But anyways, they're raising money, and if you have loose change or like a dollar bill, or if you got your check and want to donate like $20, this will be going around, and this is like church, right? Don't go in and grab the money out, right? This is just a fact, right? So this will be going around, and I'm trying to think how this works. So this will go up this area. Once it gets to you, it's going to go to the middle section and go all the way down. And then the last person here will pass over here. Okay, this is going to work. It's going to go up. The last person will go, it's going to go through the middle section and then to the left section. And again, one more thing. Okay, all the money goes directly to the charity, right? It doesn't go through some second-hand secretary that will order pizza to feed, her office, right? This goes straight to the hospital, okay? Okay, so back to biology. Let's talk about the carbon cycle. Okay, so with the global carbon cycle, you want to be able to think in terms of photosynthesis, respiration, and where the carbon's going. Is it being added to the atmosphere or removed from the atmosphere, right? So let's draw this real quick. So let's draw a little box that says living organisms. Okay, and the atmosphere. Here's the ocean. Okay? So, living organisms do respiration, right? So they take in oxygen and release what to the environment? Yeah, you release carbon into the atmosphere via cellular respiration, right? So you're putting carbon into the atmosphere. Now you have lots of carbon in the atmosphere that can be used by plants to do photosynthesis, right? And so photosynthesis will take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into living organisms, right? So photosynthesis takes carbon out of the atmosphere. Respiration puts carbon into the atmosphere, right? So those are opposing processes, okay? And again, living organisms will breathe out carbon dioxide via respiration into the ocean, and you have plants in the ocean that take up the carbon dioxide via photosynthesis, right? So carbon is taken out of the oceans, okay? So this process, it's a cycle, so you have this occurring all the time, right? And what happens when living organisms die? Yeah, it gets broken down and stored. The carbon is stored in rocks, right? And again, everything we're talking about relates to carbon right now, right? So that carbon is stored in rocks, right? What are some examples of rocks? Right? Fossil fuels, right? The coal that you use, the gas that you use was extracted from rocks, right? So as we burn fossil fuels, we're increasing the amount of carbon that gets released to the environment, right? The atmosphere. Okay? So just keep this at the back of your mind, and using this, let's talk about this right part of the page. How have humans altered the cycle? So for a very long time, the carbon added to the atmosphere was equal to the carbon removed from the atmosphere, right? So if that's true, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere versus the amount removed remain relatively constant, right? And about 0.038% of carbon is from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, right? So there's not a huge percentage of carbon in the atmosphere, right? But even a little increase could have huge effects, right? So let's look at some ways that humans have changed the balance. So how humans have altered the cycle.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
what was that percentage?
It was 0.038%. Okay. So again, everything we're talking about deals with carbon and carbon dioxide, okay? So what have humans done? Okay, burn fossil fuels. Before we started burning fossil fuels, this carbon was stored in rocks, right? So by burning fossil fuels, you are releasing carbon dioxide from the rocks into the atmosphere, right? So you are increasing the carbon dioxide being released to the atmosphere, right? You're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So that started happening after the Industrial Revolution, right? So now the cycle starts to not be balanced anymore, right? We're adding more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than it's being removed. What's another thing that humans have done? Okay, they have done deforestation. Okay? So deforestation is different from the third thing, which is burning trees. Okay? Okay. Deforestation, what is that? It's cutting down a tree, right? So if you cut down a tree, you have fewer trees, right? So fewer trees means more or less photosynthesis. Less photosynthesis. Okay. So are you adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by cutting down trees? You're not adding carbon dioxide, you're doing what? Less carbon dioxide is being removed, right? So there is a difference, right? Number one, by burning rocks, you're increasing the carbon dioxide added into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, right? So by cutting down trees, less carbon dioxide is being removed from the atmosphere. Okay? So there is a difference. So by having fewer trees, less carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. Right? So you can ask you, what are things that add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? Deforestation isn't one of them, right? Okay. Any questions about that?